Picture yourself in a quiet temple 10,000 years ago. The air is cool against your skin. Candlelight flickers across walls of mud brick, casting dancing shadows that seem alive. In the corner, a scribe sits cross-legged on woven reeds. His hands move slowly, pressing a carved stick into soft clay. Each press makes a small wedge shape. These tiny marks will last forever. What is he writing? Names. The names of kings. But these are not ordinary kings. These rulers did not reign for 20 years, or 50, or even 100. According to the clay, they ruled for thousands upon thousands of years. Some lived 30,000 years, some lived 43,000. The numbers seem impossible, like dreams written in stone. This is the Sumerian king list. It tells of kings who ruled before the great flood came and covered the world. Cities glowed under ancient stars. Thrones held rulers whose names sound like magic spells. Then the waters rose. Everything changed. When the flood went away, kingship came down from heaven again, and new rulers sat on new thrones. Tonight we are not here to solve this mystery. We are not here to prove or disprove anything. We are here to drift into it, to let it hold us gently. Let the weight of your day fall away. Let ancient Sumer wrap around you like a soft blanket. Breathe deep. The scribes are waiting in the candlelight. The flood is coming, but it is still far away. Right now, there is only the glow of old wisdom and the rhythm of a story whispered for 5,000 years. Close your eyes, rest your mind. We begin our journey now. Long ago, in the land between two rivers, people made marks that would never disappear. They lived in a place we call Mesopotamia today. The word means between rivers. The two rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates. Their water gave life to dry earth. Where the rivers flowed, cities grew. Where cities grew, stories began. These people did not have paper. They did not have pens or pencils. Instead, they used what the earth gave them. They dug clay from riverbanks. Wet clay is soft, like mud after rain. You can press your finger into it and leave a mark. The Sumerians knew this. They shaped clay into flat squares, like very heavy pages of a book. While the clay was still wet and soft, they wrote on it. But they did not write the way we write today. They used a tool made from a reed plant. A reed is a tall grass that grows near water. They cut the reed and shaped one end into a point, like a tiny triangle. When they pressed this pointed reed into soft clay, it made a wedge shape. One press, one wedge, another press, another wedge. Slowly, carefully, patterns appeared. These wedge patterns were their letters. We call this writing cuneiform. The word comes from the Latin word for wedge. After the scribe finished writing, they left the clay in the sun. The hot Mesopotamian sun baked the clay hard, like a brick. Once hard, the clay would last forever. Rain could not wash it away. Time could not erase it. The marks were permanent. This is why we can still read Sumerian writing today, thousands of years later. The clay tablets survived when everything else turned to dust. One day, archaeologists digging in the ruins of ancient cities found something remarkable. Among broken pots and fallen walls, they discovered clay tablets covered in wedge marks. When scholars learned to read these marks, they found lists of kings, lists of cities, lists of years. But one list was different from all the others. It told of kings who ruled before a great flood. It gave each king a number of years, but the numbers were impossible. No human being lives 30,000 years. No king rules for 40,000 years. Yet there the numbers were, pressed into clay, permanent and strange. This was the Sumerian king list. It began with the words, "When kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was in Eridu." Eridu was the first city, they believed. The gods chose it as the place where civilization would begin. The first king sat on the first throne. His name was Alulim. According to the clay, He ruled for 28,800 years. Then came the next king, and the next, each with reigns measured in thousands and thousands of years. Scholars looked at these tablets and wondered, were the Sumerians lying? Were they confused? Did they measure time differently than we do? Or were they trying to tell us something else, something hidden in the numbers? The clay offered no explanations. It simply stated the facts as the ancient scribes understood them. Kings ruled. Time passed. Then the flood came, and the world changed forever. The Sumerian king list is not one tablet. It is many tablets, found in different places, written at different times. Some tablets are complete, others are broken, with pieces missing. But when scholars compared them all, they found the same names appearing again and again. The same cities, the same impossible numbers. It was as if every scribe across hundreds of years felt the need to copy this list, to keep it alive. The oldest versions we have today were written around 2,100 years before the Common Era. That makes them over 4,000 years old. But the stories they tell are even older. They speak of kings who ruled before 3,000 years before the Common Era, perhaps earlier. We are looking back across an ocean of time, trying to see shapes moving in the mist. What did this list mean to the people who wrote it? To the Sumerians, the past was sacred. Kings were not just rulers, they were chosen by the gods. When a king sat on his throne, he connected heaven and earth. His authority flowed down from the sky like rain. The king list was not just history. It was proof that the gods had always watched over the land between the rivers. Kingship was eternal because the gods made it so. The list divides time into two parts, before the flood and after the flood. This division was important. It marked the moment when everything changed. Before the flood, the world was different. Kings lived impossibly long lives. Cities were ancient beyond imagination. Then the flood came. The waters covered everything. When they drained away, the world began again. Kings still ruled, but now their lives were shorter. Time moved differently. The age of giants had ended. The age of humans began. After the flood, the numbers become more reasonable. Kings rule for hundreds of years instead of thousands. Then, as the list continues forward in time, the reigns grow shorter still. By the time we reach kings whose existence we can verify through other sources, they rule for 20 or 30 years, normal human lifespans. It is as if the list is a bridge between myth and reality, between divine time and human time. Some scholars believe the earliest kings never existed at all. They think these names represent dynasties, not individuals. One king might actually be 10 generations of rulers compressed into a single name. Others suggest the Sumerians measured time differently. Perhaps a year meant something else to them, a season, a harvest cycle, a lunar month. If we change what a year means, the numbers become less impossible. But there is another way to read the list. Perhaps the Sumerians were not trying to record literal history. Perhaps they were encoding something else. The numbers follow patterns. They relate to the Sumerian number system, which was based on 60. Many of the reigns are multiples of 3,600, which is 60 times 60. These are sacred numbers, cosmic numbers. Maybe the king list is not a timeline, but a cosmic calendar, a way of mapping human history onto the movement of stars and planets. Before the flood, the king list tells us there were 5 cities. The first was Eridu. Then came Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. In these 5 cities, kingship dwelled. 8 kings ruled between them, their reigns stretching across unimaginable centuries. These were the antediluvian kings, the ones who came before the deluge. Eridu holds a special place in Sumerian memory. They called it the first city ever built. According to myth, the god Enki rose from the sweet waters beneath the earth and chose this spot to begin civilization. He taught humans how to build, how to farm, how to write. Eridu was his gift, the seed from which all other cities would grow. Archaeologists have excavated Eridu. They found layers upon layers of temples, each built on top of the ruins of the previous one. The oldest layers date back to around 5,800 years before the Common Era. That makes Eridu one of the oldest cities ever discovered. People lived there, worshipped there, built there for thousands of years. The myth and the archaeology agree on one thing. Eridu is ancient beyond words. Bad Tibira, the second city, means fortress of the metal workers. This city was known for crafting bronze and copper. Smiths hammered hot metal into tools, weapons, jewelry. The air would have been thick with smoke from forges. The sound of metal ringing against metal would have echoed through narrow streets. This was a city of makers, of craftsmen, of people who transformed earth into useful things. Larak is more mysterious. We know less about it from archaeology. But the king list places it firmly among the sacred five. Perhaps it was a religious centre, a place of temples and priests rather than merchants and smiths. Perhaps it was small, but spiritually important. Not all power comes from size. Sippar was dedicated to the sun god, Shamash. Imagine a city where every morning began with hymns to the rising sun, where priests tracked the sun's path across the sky, marking solstices and equinoxes, where gold and bronze decorations caught the light and made the whole city glow. Sippar was a city of light, of warmth, of divine attention, focused on humanity from the heavens. Shuruppak was the last city before the flood. It was also the home of the flood hero in Sumerian tradition. His name was Ziusudra, though later Babylonians would call him Utnapishtim. The gods warned him that a flood was coming. They told him to build a great boat and fill it with animals and his family. When the waters rose, he alone survived. After the flood, the gods granted him eternal life. He became immortal, like the ancient kings, but in a different way. He earned it through survival. The first king in the Sumerian king list is named Alulim. His name appears at the very beginning, pressed into clay by scribes who lived thousands of years after he supposedly ruled. Alulim of Eridu. The first throne, the first crown, the first man chosen by heaven to lead others. According to the tablet, he ruled for 28,800 years. Try to imagine that number. 28,000 years ago, humans were not yet farming. They lived in small groups, hunting animals and gathering plants. They had not built cities or temples. They had not invented writing. If Alulim truly ruled for that long, his reign would stretch back beyond the invention of civilization itself. It is a number that breaks time. After Alulim came Alanga, also of Eridu. He ruled for 36,000 years. Then came Enmen-Luana of Bad Tibira, who ruled for 43,200 years. The numbers grow larger, not smaller. Each king's reign surpasses the last. It is as if time itself was different in those days, as if years passed more slowly, or meant something other than what we understand today. Mengal-Ana came next, ruling for 28,800 years. Then Dumuzid, a shepherd king, ruled for 36,000 years. Dumuzid is an interesting name. In later Sumerian mythology, Dumuzi is a god who dies and is reborn each year, representing the cycle of seasons. The grain dies in winter, comes back in spring. Perhaps this king name is connected to that cycle, to the eternal return of life from death. Ensib-Ziana ruled for 28,800 years. Enmen-Durana ruled for 21,000 years. Finally, Ubara-Tutu of Shuruppak ruled for 18,600 years. Notice something interesting. The numbers are getting smaller. As we approach the flood, the reigns grow shorter. Time is speeding up. Or perhaps the divine is pulling away, and human time is beginning to reassert itself. These names are not random sounds. Each one has meaning in Sumerian. En often means Lord. Lu can mean man. Aina connects to heaven. Gal means great. The names describe the king's qualities or divine connections. They are titles as much as names. They tell us who these rulers were meant to be. Lords of heaven, great men chosen by gods, shepherds of their people. When we read these names aloud, we are speaking words that have not been common speech for 5,000 years. The sounds feel strange on the tongue. They come from a time before most of what we call history existed. They are echoes from a world that drowned. Yet here they are, preserved in clay, waiting for us to find them, to wonder about them, to whisper them into the night and feel the weight of time. Picture the night sky as it appeared 5,000 years ago. No electric lights washed out the stars, no cities glowed on the horizon. When darkness came, it was complete. And when people looked up, they saw everything. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. Planets wandered among fixed stars. The moon was close and bright and ruled the night. Under these stars, the 5 antediluvian cities lived their lives. In Eridu, priests climbed the ziggurat steps at dawn and dusk, greeting the sun and moon. They tracked which stars rose with which season. They noticed that certain stars appeared before the floods came, before the harvest ripened. The sky was their calendar, their clock, their connection to the divine order. In Bad Tibira, metal workers woke before dawn. The best time to work the forge was early morning, before the desert heat became unbearable. They shaped bronze by firelight that competed with starlight. The glow of molten metal reflected off mud brick walls. Sparks rose like stars themselves, tiny and bright and brief. By the time the sun rose, they had already created beauty from raw earth. Larak might have been quieter. Perhaps it was a city of dreams and visions, a place where priests studied omens and prophetic signs, where people came seeking guidance from the gods. The temples there would have been filled with incense smoke, prayers whispered in the dark, offerings left on altars, the rustle of robes as priests moved through shadowed halls. Sippar celebrated the sun. Every morning was a festival. When the first light touched the eastern horizon, horns sounded, drums beat, singers raised their voices. The sun god Shamash was returning, keeping his promise, bringing light back to the world. Throughout the day, priests tracked the sun's path. They marked its highest point at noon. They noted where it set in the evening. The sun's movement was law, order, divine presence made visible. Shuruppak sat on the edge of things. It was the last city before the flood. Perhaps people there felt it somehow. Perhaps they looked at the rivers and wondered when the water would rise too high. Perhaps they had stories passed down, warnings whispered, dreams of drowning, or perhaps they felt safe, protected by the gods, confident that the world would continue forever as it had always been. Life in these cities was not easy. The sun was hot. The work was hard. People planted barley and wheat. They dug irrigation canals to bring river water to their fields. They raised sheep and goats. They ground grain into flour. They baked bread in clay ovens. They wove cloth from wool and flax. They made beer from barley. They traded with distant cities for things they could not make themselves. They married. They raised children. They grew old. They died. But they lived under the same stars we see tonight, part of a story larger than themselves. Every culture on Earth has a flood story. The details change, but the pattern remains. Once upon a time, the gods grew angry, or perhaps they grew sad, or perhaps they simply decided it was time for the world to begin again. They sent water, not rain that lasts a day or a week, water that kept rising, water that covered hills, then mountains, water that erased everything humans had built. In the Mesopotamian version, the gods decided humans were too loud. They multiplied too quickly. Their noise disturbed the divine sleep. The god Enlil, lord of wind and storm, could not rest. He convinced the other gods that humanity must be destroyed. They would send a flood to wash the earth clean, to return it to silence. But one god disagreed. Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water, loved humans. He had taught them so much, he could not let them all die. So he chose one man to save. He whispered to the walls of a reed house. He told the walls to tell the man inside. Build a boat, the walls whispered. Make it large and strong. Bring your family. Bring animals, too, of every kind. Seal the door with pitch. When the rain comes, you will survive. The man's name was Ziusudra in the Sumerian version. Later, the Babylonians would call him Utnapishtim. The Hebrews would call him Noah. The name changes, but the action remains the same. A righteous man builds a boat. The flood comes. The world drowns. Only those in the boat survive. When the water finally recedes, the boat comes to rest on a mountain. The man releases birds to search for dry land. When a bird returns with an olive branch, or does not return at all, he knows the water has gone down. The earth is ready for life again. Why do so many cultures share this story? Some scholars believe a real flood happened. Around 7,000 years ago, the Black Sea may have filled catastrophically when the Mediterranean broke through a land barrier. The water rose dozens of feet in a matter of days. People who lived along the shore would have fled or drowned. Survivors would have carried the memory, telling and retelling until it became myth. Others point to annual flooding in Mesopotamia. The Tigris and Euphrates are unpredictable rivers. Some years they overflow their banks dramatically. Fields drown, houses wash away, livestock dies, grain stores spoil. After such disasters, it might feel like the whole world had been underwater. A particularly catastrophic flood could enter cultural memory as the flood, the one that defined before and after. But perhaps the flood story is not about a single event. Perhaps it represents something deeper, a psychological truth. The sense that sometimes everything must be destroyed before it can be rebuilt. That life moves in cycles of creation and destruction, that nothing lasts forever, but everything returns. Water covers the land, then withdraws. Winter kills the plants, then spring brings them back. We sleep and die, but children wake and are born. The flood is not just history. It is the rhythm of existence itself. There is a line where myth ends and history begins, but that line is not clear. It is not sharp. It is more like a fog where one thing slowly becomes another. The Sumerian king list walks through that fog. It begins in pure myth, with kings who cannot have been real. Then, slowly, it moves toward names we can verify, events we can date, rulers who left behind actual evidence. The flood serves as the dividing point in the list. Everything before it is suspect. Everything after it becomes increasingly credible. It is as if the Sumerians themselves understood that ancient memory is unreliable. They knew the old stories mixed truth with exaggeration, fact with dream. But they wrote it all down anyway, because even uncertain memory is better than forgetting completely. After the flood, the king list says, kingship descended from heaven again, but now things are different. The first post-flood dynasty ruled in the city of Kish. The first king was Gar, who ruled for 1,200 years. Still impossible by our standards, but much less impossible than 28,000 years. Time has changed. Human time is beginning to assert itself. As we read down the list, through dynasty after dynasty, the numbers continue to shrink. Rulers govern for hundreds of years, then dozens of years. By the time we reach the first dynasty of Uruk, around 2,600 years before the Common Era, we encounter a name that changed everything: Gilgamesh. According to the king list, he ruled for 126 years. According to legend, he was part god, part man, and he searched for immortality. Gilgamesh is the bridge. He appears in myths and poems, larger than life, performing impossible deeds. But he also appears in other historical documents. He seems to have been a real king who ruled a real city and became so famous that stories grew around him like vines on an old wall. By the time of Gilgamesh, we have entered history's outer edges. We can almost touch it. Later in the king list come names we can verify through multiple sources. Kings whose inscriptions archaeologists have found, whose wars are mentioned by enemies, whose building projects we can still excavate. The fog has cleared. We are standing in documented history now, where facts can be checked and events dated. So what is the king list ultimately? Is it history or myth? The answer is both. It is a document that understands its own nature. It begins in sacred time, where gods rule through kings who live forever. It moves through a great catastrophe that resets the world. Then it gradually transitions into human time, where rulers live normal lives and leave normal evidence. It is a map of consciousness as much as a map of time. It shows us how ancient people thought about their past, as something that flowed from the divine into the mortal, from myth into memory, from impossible to believable. And in that flowing, something true was preserved, even if we can no longer say exactly what. Around 4,900 years ago, something happened in Mesopotamia. We cannot say exactly what. We cannot say it was the flood of legend. But geological evidence shows that major flooding occurred around this time. Archaeologists digging at Ur, Uruk, Shuruppak, and other cities have found layers of river clay. Clean clay with no artifacts, no pottery, no tools. Just clay, deposited by water, separating older layers of civilization from newer ones. Leonard Woolley, the British archaeologist who excavated Ur in the 1920s, found a layer of clay nearly 3 meters thick. Below this clay, houses, pottery, tools, evidence of human life. Above the clay, different houses, different pottery styles, evidence of a new people or a new era. Woolley believed he had found evidence of the biblical flood. He announced it to the world with confidence. Modern archaeologists are more cautious. They point out that not all cities have the same clay layer at the same time. Flooding was common in Mesopotamia. Rivers changed course. Levees broke. Different cities flooded in different years. There is no single catastrophic event visible in the archaeological record. But there are many floods, spread across centuries, any one of which might have been devastating enough to enter cultural memory. Yet the stories persist, not just in Sumer, but in Babylon, in Assyria, in Hebrew scripture. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains a detailed flood account. The survivor, Utnapishtim, tells Gilgamesh how he built his boat, how the storm came, how the gods themselves were frightened by the destruction they had caused. The water rose for 6 days and 7 nights. When it finally stopped, only Utnapishtim and those in his boat remained alive. In the biblical book of Genesis, Noah receives similar instructions. Build an ark, bring animals. The flood lasts 40 days and 40 nights. When the waters recede, Noah sends out a raven and a dove. The dove returns with an olive leaf. God promises never to flood the earth again and places a rainbow in the sky as a sign. The parallels are striking. Scholars believe the Hebrew writers knew the Mesopotamian flood stories. When the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon in the 6th century before the Common Era, they encountered these ancient tales. They adapted them, reshaped them, made them part of their own sacred narrative. Stories travel. They cross borders. They change with each telling. But the core remains. What matters is not whether one catastrophic flood happened, but that the idea of the flood became powerful. It represented judgment and mercy, destruction and preservation, the end of one age and the beginning of another. It explained why the world seemed old, why there were ruins, why ancient things felt different from new things. The flood was a narrative tool that helped people make sense of deep time, of the feeling that something had changed long ago, that the present world was built on the drowned remains of a previous world. When the waters drained away, mud and silt covered everything. The earth was clean but empty. The old world had drowned. Now a new world would begin. According to the Sumerian king list, kingship descended from heaven once again. The gods had not abandoned humanity. They simply required a reset, a fresh start. The first post-flood dynasty ruled from the city of Kish. Kish was north of the older cities, perhaps less damaged by whatever flooding had occurred. Or perhaps it was simply where survivors gathered, where new leadership emerged from the ruins. The king list names 23 kings of the first dynasty of Kish. Together, they ruled for just over 24,000 years. Still impossible, but the pattern is changing. The first king of Kish was Gaur, his reign, 1,200 years. Compare this to the pre-flood kings, Alulim, 28,000 years. The scale has shifted dramatically. We are still in mythic time, but mythic time is moving toward human time. Each generation brings the numbers closer to reality. Some scholars believe these post-flood kings represent actual historical figures, but their reigns have been multiplied or extended symbolically. Perhaps each name represents a dynasty, not an individual. Perhaps 1,200 years means 12 generations, with each generation ruling for a normal human lifespan. If we divide by 10 or 12, we get numbers that make sense. 100 years becomes 10 years, 1,200 years becomes 100 years, or 12 kings ruling 10 years each. Others suggest the Sumerians deliberately inflated early reigns to establish legitimacy. The older a dynasty, the more divine its origins. Long reigns proved divine favor. A king who ruled for centuries must have been chosen by the gods. By the time scribes were writing the king list, around 2,000 years before the Common Era, they were looking back at dynasties 1,000 years old or more. Memory had become uncertain. They filled the gaps with numbers that felt appropriately ancient. What we do know is that Kish was a real city. Archaeologists have excavated it. They found evidence of early Sumerian occupation, graves, pottery, cylinder seals. The city existed. It was important. Whether the specific kings named in the king list ruled there is harder to prove. No inscriptions have been found naming Gea or most of his successors. They may be legendary, or their monuments may still be buried, waiting for excavators to find them. After Kish, the list moves to other cities. Kingship was not fixed in one place. It moved. When one dynasty fell or weakened, another city claimed supremacy. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Umma, these cities competed for power, for trade, for divine favor. The king list documents this movement. Then Kish was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Rihanna, it says. Iana was the temple district of Uruk. Power flowed like the rivers, changing course, sometimes returning to old channels, sometimes carving new ones. In the city of Uruk, around 2,600 years before the Common Era, a king ruled whose name would echo through time. His name was Gilgamesh. According to the king list, he was the 5th king of the first dynasty of Uruk. He ruled for 126 years. According to legend, he was 2/3 god and 1/3 human, born of a mortal father and the goddess Ninsun. The stories say Gilgamesh was restless. He was stronger than other men, faster, more ambitious. He exhausted his people with endless building projects. He challenged young men to wrestling matches and always won. He claimed the right to sleep with brides on their wedding night. The people of Uruk cried out to the gods. Gilgamesh is too much, they said. He does not let us rest. So the gods created a wild man named Enkidu to be Gilgamesh's equal. Enkidu lived with animals in the wilderness. He had never seen a city. He knew nothing of civilization. But when he and Gilgamesh finally met, they fought. They wrestled in the streets of Uruk, shaking the walls, two forces of nature colliding. Neither could defeat the other. When they finally stopped, exhausted, they became friends, brothers, equals at last. Together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu had adventures. They traveled to the cedar forest to fight Humbaba, the guardian demon. They killed the bull of heaven sent by the goddess Ishtar. They were heroes, invincible, beloved by the people, feared by enemies. But the gods decided Enkidu must die for killing the bull of heaven. Enkidu grew sick, he suffered, he died in Gilgamesh's arms. Gilgamesh was destroyed by grief. For the first time, he understood that death was real, that it would come for him too. He had been half god, strong enough to fight demons, but not strong enough to save his friend. If Enkidu could die, then so could he. This thought terrified him. He could not accept it. So Gilgamesh set out on a quest. He would find the secret of eternal life. He had heard of Utnapishtim, the man who survived the flood and was granted immortality by the gods. If Gilgamesh could find him, perhaps Utnapishtim would share the secret. Gilgamesh travelled to the edge of the world. He passed through the mountains where the sun rises. He crossed the waters of death. Finally, he found Utnapishtim living on a distant island. Utnapishtim told him the truth. There is no secret. The gods granted me immortality as a special gift after the flood. It cannot be repeated. You will die, Gilgamesh, like all humans die. But before Gilgamesh left, Utnapishtim told him of a plant that grew at the bottom of the sea. It would not grant eternal life, but it would restore youth. Gilgamesh dove deep and retrieved it. But on his journey home, while he bathed in a pool, a snake stole the plant and ate it. The snake shed its skin and became young again. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk empty-handed, having learned that immortality cannot be grasped. Only one thing lasts: the memory of great deeds, the walls he built, the stories told about him. That is the only forever humans can achieve. Centuries after Gilgamesh died, scribes in the old Babylonian period sat in temple schools and copied the king list onto fresh clay. By then, Gilgamesh had been dead for 1,000 years or more. The cities he knew had risen and fallen. New empires had emerged. Languages had evolved. Yet the scribes still carefully pressed each name, each number, into wet clay. They preserved what their ancestors had preserved. Why did they do this? Why spend hours, days copying lists of kings who ruled before anyone could remember? The answer lies in what memory meant to ancient peoples. Memory was not optional. It was sacred duty. To forget was to dishonor. To remember was to connect past, present, and future into one continuous thread. In Mesopotamian thought, the present world rested on foundations laid by ancestors. Every city, every temple, every law had origins in the distant past. Kings justified their rule by claiming descent from ancient dynasties. Priests performed rituals exactly as they had been performed for centuries because deviation would anger the gods. The past was not dead. It was alive, active, demanding respect. The scribes who copied the king list were not just recording history. They were performing a religious act. Each name they wrote was a prayer, a recognition that kingship came from heaven, that the gods had chosen these rulers, that the divine order continued unbroken from the beginning of time to the present moment. To copy the list was to participate in that continuity, to make oneself part of the sacred chain. Scribal schools in ancient Mesopotamia were attached to temples. Students began training as children. They learned to form cuneiform signs on practice tablets. They copied literary texts, mathematical tables, legal documents. They memorized lists of gods, of cities, of stars. The king list was part of this curriculum, something every educated person needed to know. These students were not just learning to write, they were learning to think like scribes. They were entering a tradition that stretched back 2,000 years by their time and would continue for centuries more. They were becoming the memory keepers of their civilization. When they finished their training, they would work in temples, palaces, and government offices. They would record business deals, religious festivals, royal decrees. They would make culture possible. The king list exists today because these scribes did their work faithfully. The tablets they made were preserved in temple libraries. When cities were destroyed, the tablets were buried under rubble and forgotten. But clay is nearly indestructible. Centuries later, archaeologists dug through the ruins and found them. The wedge marks were still clear, the names could still be read. The scribes had done more than copy text. They had defeated time itself, had sent a message across 4,000 years that we receive today. Their hands shaped clay. Our eyes read what they wrote. Past and present touch. Look again at the numbers in the king list. On men lu ana, 43,200 years. Dumuzid, 36,000 years. Alanga, 36,000 years. These are not random numbers. They follow patterns. They repeat. They relate to each other in mathematical ways. The Sumerians used a number system based on 60. We still use it today when we measure time. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. These are gifts from ancient Mesopotamia, from people who studied the sky and found order in the movement of stars and planets. 3,600 is 60 times 60. It is a sacred number in Sumerian mathematics. Many of the reigns in the king list are multiples of this number. 43,200 is 12 times 3,600. 36,000 is 10 times 3,600. The numbers are not random. They are deliberate, meaningful, part of a system. Some scholars believe these numbers encode astronomical data. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, takes about 26,000 years to complete one cycle. The orbital periods of planets, the cycles of eclipses, the patterns of Venus in the sky, all these could be represented through numbers. Perhaps the king list is not a chronology of rulers, but a calendar of cosmic events. Others suggest the numbers represent numerological symbolism rather than actual time. In many ancient cultures, certain numbers carried meaning beyond their quantity. 7 was holy, 12 was complete, 60 was divine. By assigning enormous numbers to ancient kings, the scribes were not lying about history. They were expressing a truth about those kings' importance, their connection to the divine order, their role in cosmic time rather than human time. There is also the possibility that different types of years are being used. Perhaps early in the list, a year means a lunar month, about 29 days. If we divide the impossible reigns by 12, we get smaller numbers. 28,800 years becomes 2,400 years, still long but less absurd. If a year means a season, divide by 4. The numbers shrink further, but perhaps we are overthinking this. Perhaps the ancient scribes were simply creating origin stories, and origin stories need to feel ancient, to stretch back beyond imagination. Every culture does this. The ancient Egyptians believed their civilization was tens of thousands of years old. The Greeks had myths of golden ages in the distant past. The Chinese spoke of dynasties that ruled for centuries. Origin stories need weight, need depth. Enormous numbers provide that depth. They say, "We have always been here. We are older than old. Our roots go down beyond sight." Whether the numbers are literal does not matter as much as what they accomplish. They make the past feel infinite, eternal, divine. When you press a reed into clay, you leave a mark that lasts. But when you arrange those marks into patterns, you create meaning. The Sumerian king list is full of patterns. Patterns of numbers. Patterns of names, patterns of cities. These patterns tell us something about how the ancient mind worked. The list is organized by dynasty. First came the dynasty of Eridu, then Bad Tibira, then Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. After the flood, Kish. then Eanna, which was part of Uruk, then then Awan, then Hamazi, dynasty after dynasty, each rising, ruling, then falling. Power moves from place to place like water finding new channels. Each dynasty has a specific number of kings. The pre-flood period had 8 kings in 5 cities. The first dynasty of Kish had 23 kings. The first dynasty of Uruk had 12 kings. These numbers are not accidental. 12 is a complete number, representing the months of the year, the signs of the zodiac. 23 relates to lunar cycles. 8 is 2 cubed, a number of balance. Cities repeat in the list. Kish has 3 dynasties. Uruk has 5. This reflects historical reality. Cities did not rule once and then disappear. Power shifted between rival cities repeatedly. Uruk might dominate for generations, then decline. Kish would rise again. Then Ur, then back to Uruk. This matches what we know from other sources about Sumerian political history. It was competitive, dynamic, constantly changing. The names of kings also follow patterns. Many begin with En, meaning Lord. Many end with Anna, connecting to heaven. Some names are clearly divine. Some are clearly human. The names change as the list moves forward in time. Early names sound more mythological. Later names sound more like actual names that parents might give children. The shift is gradual but noticeable. There are also recurring themes. Shepherds become kings. Gilgamesh was preceded by Dumuzi, a shepherd. Many Mesopotamian kings claimed humble origins. The shepherd king was an ideal type, someone who cares for his flock, who protects them from wolves, who leads them to good pasture. The metaphor was powerful then, and it remains powerful today. Another pattern: many dynasties end with a woman. The third dynasty of Kish ends with Kubau, described as a tavern keeper, who became queen. Tavern keepers were often women in ancient Mesopotamia. They brewed beer, hosted gatherings, heard gossip. Kubau is one of the only women named in the entire king list, yet her inclusion suggests women could hold power. Her reign is listed as 100 years, and after her came her son, founding a new dynasty. She was a transition point, a bridge between old and new. The patterns in the king list create a sense of order. History was not random chaos, it followed rules. Dynasties rose and fell according to divine will. Numbers had meanings, names carried significance. Even time itself was structured, divided, patterned. For people living in an uncertain world, where floods could destroy cities, where wars could erupt without warning, this sense of pattern was comforting. It said, there is order, there is meaning. The gods are watching, and history has a shape. The Sumerian king list was written for people 4,000 years ago, but it speaks to us today. We still struggle with the same questions. Where do we come from? How long have we been here? What came before us? Is our past divine or human, myth or history? The list offers one ancient answer to these eternal questions. Modern historians read the king list differently than the scribes who wrote it did. We look for verifiable facts. We cross-reference names with other documents. We compare dates with archaeological evidence. When we find a king named in both the king list and in building inscriptions, we mark that as historical. When we find only the king list mentioning someone, we mark that as legendary or uncertain. This approach has limitations. Just because we have not found evidence yet does not mean it never existed. Temples crumble, inscriptions erode, tablets break, fire destroys libraries. Most of the ancient world has turned to dust. The pieces we have are fragments. Archaeologists estimate we have recovered less than 1% of what once existed. 99% is still buried, or destroyed, or lost forever. So when we call something myth, we should hold that judgment lightly. We mean we cannot verify this yet. We do not mean this is definitely false. The difference matters. Gilgamesh was considered pure mythology until archaeologists found inscriptions mentioning him. Suddenly, he became historical. The same could happen with other names in the list. New discoveries happen every year. What remains valuable about the king list, beyond its historical claims, is what it shows us about how ancient people thought. They did not separate sacred from secular the way we do. History and mythology were braided together, inseparable. A king was both a human who ruled and a representative of divine order. His long reign in the king list was both a claim about his years and a claim about his importance. The list also shows us that every culture needs an origin story. We need to know where we came from. We need to feel connected to something larger than ourselves. The Sumerians looked back to Eridu, to Alulim, to the flood, and saw the hand of the gods shaping their history. We look back at the Sumerians, at the clay tablets, at the wedge marks, and we see the beginning of recorded history, the moment when humans started writing down their memory and sending it forward through time. In a way, we are still doing what those scribes did. We preserve. We remember. We argue about what is true. We copy important texts. We pass knowledge to the next generation. We make marks that will outlast us now in books, in digital files, in databases. But the impulse is the same. We refuse to let the past disappear. We insist that what came before matters, that we are part of a continuous story, that time connects us to people long dead. The Sumerian scribes would understand what we are doing. They would recognize us as colleagues, as fellow memory keepers. Across 4,000 years, we share a purpose. As we read further into the king list, moving past the flood, past the earliest dynasties, we begin to encounter names that appear in other sources. These are the moments when myth solidifies into history, when legend becomes documentary fact. These are our first clear revelations, the first handholds on the cliff face of time. One such name is Enmebaragesi, a king of the first dynasty of Kish. The king list says he ruled for 900 years. We know this is exaggerated, but we also know he existed. Archaeologists have found inscriptions bearing his name. He fought against the city of Elam. He brought back spoils of war. He built temples. These are documented facts, carved in stone, found in the ruins of ancient buildings. Enmebaragesi ruled around 2,600 years before the Common Era, roughly contemporary with Gilgamesh. His son, Agur of Kish, is mentioned in poems about Gilgamesh. The two rulers had conflicts. Uruk and Kish were rival cities. The stories align with the king list's chronology. Suddenly, we are not just reading myth. We are reading compressed, stylized, but fundamentally real history. Another important figure is Messanapada, first king of the first dynasty of Ur. The king list gives him 80 years. Archaeologists have found cylinder seals and inscriptions with his name. He called himself King of Kish, a title that meant Overlord of Sumer, someone who claimed authority beyond a single city. Messanapada was real, powerful, historically significant. As the list continues, more and more names become verifiable. Ernan-Sheh of Lagash, not mentioned in the king list itself, but contemporary with names that are. Lugal-Zarghezi of Umma, who briefly conquered most of Sumer before being defeated by Sargon of Akkad. Sargon is extremely well documented. He founded a new empire, conquered the cities of Sumer, established a dynasty that lasted over a century. With Sargon, we enter fully documented history. We have his inscriptions, his year names, records of his campaigns, even descriptions of his appearance. What does this transition tell us? It tells us the king list was never pure fiction. It was a genuine attempt to preserve memory, even when that memory was uncertain, exaggerated, or mixed with mythology. The scribes did the best they could with what they had. They wrote down the names that had been passed down to them. They preserved the numbers they had received from earlier sources, even when those numbers seemed impossible. We should not mock them for including Alulim with his 28,000 years, or for listing On Men Lu Ana with 43,000. They were not stupid, they were honest. They wrote what their sources said, they let the contradictions stand. Later readers could make their own judgments. The scribe's job was not to explain or rationalize, their job was to preserve. And they succeeded. Because of them, we know the names of kings who ruled 4,500 years ago. Because of them, we can trace the flow of power from city to city across centuries. Because of their faithful copying, their careful pressing of reed into clay, the past remains visible. The Sumerians did not see history as we do. We think of time as linear, a straight line from past to future, one direction, always forward. They thought of time as cyclical. Things repeated, patterns returned. What happened before would happen again. The great year, the cosmic cycle, turned like a wheel, bringing the same events around in new forms. They watched the sky and saw this truth made visible. Every night, the stars rose in the east and set in the west. Every month, the moon waxed full and waned to darkness. Every year, the sun moved north and south, marking the seasons. These cycles never changed. They were eternal, perfect, reliable. The gods moved through the heavens in predictable paths, and human history moved in similar patterns. The king list reflects this cyclical thinking. Cities rise and fall. Dynasties succeed one another. Kings rule, then die, then are replaced. The pattern repeats. Kish rises, falls, rises again. Uruk dominates, declines, returns to power. This is not random. This is cosmic order playing out on earth. What happens in heaven happens below. As above, so below. The ancient astronomers tracked the movements of Venus with special care. Venus appeared as both morning star and evening star, but they eventually realized it was the same celestial body. Its cycle lasted about 584 days. 8 Venus cycles equals 99 lunar months, a perfect harmony. These numbers appear in the king list, encoded in the reigns of kings. The cosmos and the throne were connected. The precession of the equinoxes was another great cycle they may have known. Earth's axis wobbles slowly, taking about 26,000 years to complete one rotation. This wobble changes which stars appear at the equinoxes, the points where day and night are equal. Over centuries, the zodiac shifts. Different constellations rise at spring equinox in different ages. Some scholars believe the enormous reigns in the king list encode this precession, marking not individual lifetimes but cosmic ages, vast periods when the heavens themselves shifted. When we look up at the night sky today, we see the same stars the Sumerians saw. We are separated by 5,000 years, but the constellations have barely changed. Orion still hunts. The Pleiades still cluster. The Big Dipper still pours. This continuity is humbling. It makes 5,000 years seem short. It makes our individual lives seem like single breaths in a cosmic meditation that has been going on since before humans existed and will continue long after we are gone. The Sumerians felt this too. They looked up and felt small, but also connected. The same gods who moved the planets also chose their kings. The same order that organized the stars also organized their cities. They were part of something immense, eternal, meaningful. When they recorded the king list with its impossible numbers, they were not being foolish. They were trying to capture this feeling, this connection between mortal human life and eternal cosmic time. They were saying, we are small, but we are part of something vast. Our kings connect us to heaven. Our history reflects the stars. The idea that history repeats is found everywhere in ancient thought. The Greeks spoke of the eternal return. The Hindus imagined vast cycles of creation and destruction. The Maya calculated great ages that ended and began again. The Sumerians were perhaps the first to write this idea down, to encode it in their lists and calendars and astronomical tables. In the king list, we see cities rise, dominate, then lose power to rivals. Kish rules, then Uruk, then Ur, then back to Kish. Each time a city falls, the text says the same phrase. Then, city name was defeated, and the kingship was taken to new city. This phrase repeats 17 times in some versions of the list. It becomes a rhythm, a pattern, a confirmation that change is constant but also predictable. Why did kingship move? Sometimes through conquest. A stronger king defeated a weaker one and claimed supremacy. Sometimes through economic shift. Trade routes changed. One city grew wealthy while another declined. Sometimes, perhaps, through divine decision. The gods simply chose a new favorite, withdrew their blessing from one ruler and granted it to another. But kingship always continued. It never disappeared. It might move from Kish to Uruk, from Uruk to Ur, but it remained. This was crucial to Mesopotamian thinking. Kingship was not created by humans. It was lowered from heaven at the beginning of time. It could move, but it could not end. As long as civilization existed, kings would rule. They were the link between divine order and human society. This cyclical view offered comfort. When your city was defeated, when foreign rulers sat on local thrones, when temples were destroyed and people were exiled, you could tell yourself, this has happened before. Kingship has moved before. It will move again. What is lost will return. The cycle will continue. Pain was temporary. The pattern was eternal. Modern historians see similar cycles. Empires rise and fall. Rome succeeded Greece. Christianity succeeded Rome. Islam rose while Europe entered the Dark Ages. Then Europe rose during the Renaissance. Power shifted from Mediterranean to Atlantic, from Europe to America. Each age thinks it will last forever. Each age falls. New powers emerge from unexpected places. The details change, but the pattern holds. Is this truly how history works, or is it just how we tell stories about history? Do cycles really exist, or do we impose the pattern retroactively, finding repetition because we look for it? These are questions scholars still debate. But perhaps the Sumerians would say, it does not matter whether the cycles are objectively real or just how we perceive them. What matters is that recognizing patterns helps us endure change. Knowing that power is temporary makes its loss bearable. Understanding that what falls can rise again gives hope. The Sumerian king list is more than a document about kings. It is a door. Behind that door lies a civilization that invented so much of what we take for granted: writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, literature, the wheel, the plough, irrigation systems, cities, schools, libraries. These all began in Mesopotamia, in the land between the rivers, among people who looked up at stars and pressed reeds into clay. When we read the king list, we are touching the roots of recorded history. The Sumerians were among the first people to write in a systematic way. Before them, there were pictures and symbols, marks that represented things directly. The Sumerians developed something different, signs that represented sounds that could be combined to write any word in their language. This was revolutionary. It meant anything could be written. Stories, laws, prayers, business contracts, mathematical proofs, astronomical observations. The whole range of human thought could be preserved. Writing changed everything. Before writing, knowledge died with the person who held it. A wise elder might know medicinal plants, but when they died, that knowledge vanished, unless they had taught someone perfectly. With writing, knowledge became permanent. It could be copied, shared, transported across distances. A scribe in Uruk could read what a scribe in Kish had written. Ideas could accumulate across generations instead of resetting with each death. The king list itself is a product of this revolution. It represents historical consciousness, the awareness that the past is different from the present, that things change over time, that earlier generations did things differently. This might seem obvious to us, but it was not obvious to pre-literate peoples. When everything is oral tradition, the past tends to collapse. Old stories get updated unconsciously. 3 generations ago becomes long ago. Details change with each telling. Writing allows us to see that change, to compare old versions with new ones, to notice that history has depth. Mathematics developed alongside writing. The Sumerians needed to track goods, measure fields, calculate taxes. They developed sophisticated arithmetic and geometry. They could solve complex algebraic problems. They understood ratios and proportions. Their base 6-0 number system was elegant and powerful. We still use it for time and angles because it works so well. 60 divides evenly by many numbers, making calculations easier. Astronomy grew from practical needs. Farmers needed to know when to plant and harvest. Priests needed to time religious festivals. But observation led to wonder, and wonder led to systematic study. The Sumerians identified planets, tracked their movements, predicted eclipses. They saw patterns in the sky and recognized that those patterns repeated. They were scientists and poets simultaneously, measuring the stars while also seeing them as gods. The law codes of Mesopotamia are among humanity's first written laws. The idea that rules should be public, written down, available for anyone to read this was radical. Before written law, rules were whatever the powerful said they were. Writing made law objective, something that even kings had to respect. This is the foundation of civilization, the rule of law instead of the rule of force. The Sumerians understood this 4,500 years ago. We have journeyed far together. We began with Alulim in Eridu, 28,000 impossible years, in a world before the flood. We traveled through rising waters and drowned cities. We met Gilgamesh searching for immortality. We followed kingship as it moved from city to city, like wind across water. We decoded numbers, discovered patterns, and lifted our eyes to the stars. Now we have reached a quiet summit. We can look back and see the whole landscape. The Sumerian king list is imperfect. It exaggerates, it omits, it contradicts other sources. Scholars argue over every detail, yet it remains precious. It is one of humanity's first attempts to understand its own history, to create a narrative that connects the divine past to the human present. The scribes who made it were doing something new in the world. They were creating historical consciousness, the sense that time has depth, that the present grows from the past, that we are part of a continuing story. What is most beautiful about the king list is its honesty. The scribes did not hide the problem. They wrote down the impossible reigns alongside the plausible ones. They recorded the flood as a break in continuity. They preserved competing traditions instead of harmonizing them into one smooth narrative. They gave us the raw material of history, contradictions and all, and trusted future readers to make sense of it. That trust was not misplaced. We are still making sense of it, 4,000 years later. The list also teaches humility. Every king, no matter how powerful, eventually fell. Every city, no matter how great, eventually declined. Kingship moved on. New rulers rose. The cycle continued. Power is temporary. Glory fades. Only the record remains, pressed into clay, surviving centuries of floods and fires and wars. The clay tablets outlasted the kings they described. The written word proved more permanent than bronze swords or stone palaces. There is comfort in this. If we are feeling powerless today, if our own time seems chaotic and difficult, we can remember that humans have always faced chaos and difficulty. Cities have always risen and fallen. Power has always been contested, yet civilization continues. Knowledge accumulates. We build on what came before, just as the Sumerians built on what came before them. We are part of a long, long story, and that story is not finished. The Sumerians are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their language is dead, but we can still read it. Their cities are ruins, but we can still excavate them. Their kings have been dust for 4,000 years, but we still speak their names. This is immortality, not the kind Gilgamesh sought, but the kind humans actually achieve. We persist in memory, in influence, in the ways we shape those who come after us. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, remember Alulim, remember Gilgamesh, remember Kubal the tavern keeper who became queen. Remember the scribes who pressed reeds into clay. They are with you in this moment, their marks preserved, their effort honored. You are remembering them, and one day, in some unimaginable future, someone will remember you. The story continues. The clay endures. The stars still turn. So, did the Sumerian kings truly rule before the flood? Did Alulim sit on a throne for 28,000 years? Did Enmenlu-Ana govern for 43,000? The answer, of course, is no. Not in any literal sense. Not in the way we measure time today. Those numbers are not meant to be taken as calendar years. But did something happen before a great flood? Did ancient peoples experience catastrophic flooding that divided their history into before and after? This is more likely. Geological evidence suggests major floods occurred in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago. Cultural memory of such disasters could have been preserved, mythologized, and woven into origin stories. The flood story appears in too many cultures to be pure invention. Something happened. Water rose. People remembered. Did kings rule in the cities named in the list? Yes. Archaeology confirms that Eridu, Uruk, Kish, Ur, and the others were real places. They had rulers. Some of those rulers left inscriptions. Gilgamesh, Enna-Baragesi, Messanepada. These names appear in multiple sources. They were real people who held real power. The king list preserves their memory, even if it wraps that memory in symbolic numbers. What about the enormous reigns? Were they purely symbolic, or did they encode something else? We may never know for certain. Perhaps they represent dynasties compressed into single names. Perhaps they encode astronomical cycles. Perhaps they simply express the feeling that the past was different, more divine, more connected to the gods. All these explanations are possible. None excludes the others. What matters most is not whether every detail is historically accurate. What matters is that the Sumerian king list is a genuine artifact of human memory. It shows us how ancient people thought about time, power, divinity, and history. It gives us names to speak, cities to imagine, patterns to recognize. It connects us to people who died 4,000 years ago, but who were trying to do exactly what we are doing tonight: understand where they came from, make sense of the past, and pass something meaningful to the future. The list reminds us that history is always interpretation. We choose what to remember and what to forget. We decide which sources to trust. We argue over meanings. The Sumerians did the same. They had competing traditions, uncertain dates, legendary origins, mixed with documented facts. They wrote it all down anyway. They let the contradictions stand. They trusted time and future readers to sort it out. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, let these questions linger softly. Not every question needs an answer. Some questions are more valuable unsolved because they keep us curious, humble, connected to mystery. Did impossible kings rule impossible spans? Maybe the real answer is that impossible is itself a temporary judgment. 5,000 years from now, people may read about our times and think some things we consider obvious are impossible. They may be right. Close your eyes now. The Sumerian kings have finished their reigns. The flood came and went, the scribes pressed their final mark into clay. The tablets were buried, discovered, deciphered, and shared with you tonight. You have heard their names. You have wondered at their numbers. You have travelled from Eridu to Uruk, from myth to history, from flood to foundation. That journey is complete. Rest now. The ancient world is at peace, and so are you. Sweet dreams, traveller. The clay remembers. The stars still turn. The story continues. Breathe deep, friend. You've walked with ancient kings tonight. You've stood in Eridu before the flood and watched the waters rise and fall. You've heard names that haven't been common speech for 5,000 years. Alulim, Gilgamesh, Kubau. You've seen how clay tablets outlast bronze swords. How written words survive when stone palaces crumble. If this journey helped you find a little peace, if these ancient voices gave you a moment's rest from the noise of today, consider sharing it with someone who might need the same. Send it to a friend who loves history or mystery. Leave a quiet word in the comments, a thought, a feeling, a question that lingers. What spoke to you tonight? What will you remember? Subscribe to keep wandering through history's gentlest mysteries. There are more stories waiting, more forgotten voices preserved in clay and stone, more questions that don't need immediate answers. Each story is meant to help you rest while you learn, to give your mind something beautiful to hold as sleep approaches. And if you'd like to drift even deeper into the past, explore the other journeys on this channel. Walk with Egyptian pharaohs, stand in the Library of Alexandria, witness the building of Stonehenge. Each story is told in this same gentle way, historical truth wrapped in soft words, meant for tired minds and curious hearts. For now, though, let the Sumerians fade softly. Let their impossible numbers and their clay tablets sink back into the earth they came from. Let the flood recede. Let the stars turn overhead. You have done enough wandering for one night. You are safe. You are held. The ancient world has told you its story. Now it watches over you as you sleep. So, did the Sumerian kings truly rule before the flood? Perhaps the answer is simpler and more beautiful than we think. Perhaps they ruled in the way all great stories rule, not by being factually perfect, but by surviving, by being copied generation after generation, by being whispered from teacher to student, by being pressed into clay so carefully that the marks remain readable 5,000 years later. The clay tablets crumble slowly, but the names remain: Alulim, Gilgamesh, Dumazid, Kubau. They live not in impossible thousands of years, but in the fact that we still speak them under the stars tonight. They live because scribes 4,000 years ago believed these names mattered enough to preserve. They live because archaeologists 100 years ago believed these tablets mattered enough to excavate. They live because you listened tonight, because these sounds passed through your mind, because for a moment you wondered about ancient kings in ancient cities. Maybe that's the real immortality. Not living forever in one body, but being remembered gently across vast reaches of time. Not ruling for 40,000 years, but ruling for a normal human life, and then being honoured in memory for thousands more. The scribes who wrote the king list have also achieved immortality. We don't know their names, but their work survives. Their careful pressing of reed into clay still speaks. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine those 5 cities glowing in the dark before the waters came. Eridu with its first temple, Bad Tibira with its bronze forges, Larak with its quiet priests, Sippar celebrating the sun, Shuruppak on the edge of everything. Imagine the scribes in their schools, learning to form each wedge-shaped mark, knowing their teachers' teachers had formed the same marks, feeling connected to a chain that stretched back to the beginning. And ask yourself, what will you leave behind? Not monuments of stone or bronze, those crumble too, but what small mark will you press into the soft earth of time? What kindness will be remembered? What idea will someone carry forward? What will you pass on that might, in some form, survive? You don't need to rule for thousands of years to matter. You just need to live well, love truly, and trust that the river of time carries all good things forward to unknown shores. The Sumerian flood has passed. The ancient kings have ended their reigns. The last scribe has pressed the final mark into clay and set it in the sun to harden. The tablets are buried, discovered, and deciphered. The story has been told. Now there is only starlight and silence, and the gentle certainty that everything that truly matters endures. Sweet dreams, traveller. You have journeyed far tonight, back to the beginning of recorded history, forward to this quiet moment. The journey is complete. Morning will be kind. The stars will still be turning, and somewhere, pressed into clay in a museum archive, Alulim's name is still waiting, patient as stone, ready for the next person who wonders about the first king of the first city in the first written list of rulers. Rest now. History is patient. The past will still be there tomorrow, but tonight it has given you its gift, a story that helps you sleep. Accept it gratefully. Close your eyes. The ancient world says goodnight.